Hi guys, it's Mrs. Bobman. We're going to talk today for a few minutes about the word civilization. It's a word that we use today. It's a word that we see when we look at history, and it's a word that we use when we talk about history. So we need to understand what it means, what it doesn't mean, and how it's sometimes used. So we use the word civilization today, usually to mean like someplace where people live. Right? Like if you're in a place that's not civilization, like there's no cell service and there's no Starbucks, then you've just got to get back to civilization. Like with the idea that it's the city or a place, again, where people live, where things are. That's how we use it today a lot of the time. We'll see it in history used, especially during the time of the imperialist movement of European imperialism, and I'll talk in a minute about what they mean when they use it. But as I said, we talk about it, or we use the word when we talk about history also, when we talk about civilizations in history. So Dictionary.com has a definition of civilization. They say it is an advanced state of human society in which a high level of culture, science, industry, and government has been reached. And that's a pretty good definition. We need to consider, I would add the term like in that time period, right? Because a lot of the places that we're going to look at when we talk about early civilizations obviously don't have an advanced level of science by today's standards, but might have for the time or technology, right? So we need to remember always to have historical context in mind when we talk about civilizations and whether or not we should consider them a civilization. So, like I said earlier, when we see the word civilization in history, it's most often used during the European imperialist era by Europeans, and we see it first in the writings of the French in like the 1770s-ish, referring to other places, people who live somewhere else. In other words, like people who are not us are not civilized because we live in civilization. We live in a civilized place. We are a civilized people. People that are different from us are not. So a lot of the writing that we see coming out of that time, and even a lot of the feelings and the movements of that time, use that connotation of the word, and it's an incorrect word, but again, we have to know, or an incorrect use, but we need to know how they mean it so that we can understand what they're talking about, even though it's not the appropriate use of the word. So, again, the Europeans during this era, they had been, we'd gone past the era of exploration, and a lot of European countries are sending ships out. They've sort of established that there are new places out there, that there are new groups of people that they haven't encountered before. And when they talk about civilizing these people, it almost always means to convert them to Christianity in some form or another. So they're again talking about people that think differently than us are not civilized. Therefore, we must civilize them to be like us. That's how they use it. Now, when we look at it in history, from a historical scholar perspective, and we talk about civilizations, we're talking about, again, societies that have certain shared aspects. And always in history, we can never say 100% of the time because there's always exceptions and there's always gray areas. But historians have come up with a list of 6 things that we look for when determining whether or not we consider something a civilization, and then also the things we look at to learn about the civilization. Okay, so there are 6 things. As I said, the first thing that we look for are cities, and that's plural, lots of cities. So we're looking for a group of people, a society, a collective unit that has a large enough population and is settled enough that they have multiple cities. They have lots and lots of settled areas. Again, they're not nomadic, they're not traveling around and moving, they've settled and they've been there. The population has grown and there's lots and lots of cities. Again, there's no number like magic number, how many cities you have to qualify for a civilization, but we look for something, again, that has lots and lots of cities. And the word civilization actually comes from the Latin root meaning cities, so that's kind of an easy one to remember. When we look at the first early civilizations, the big early ones, China, India, Egypt, and Mesopotamia, they all have lots of cities, and all of their cities settle near rivers. And so that's another common feature that we see when we look at civilizations. Okay, the second trait we look for is some organized government system. Now again, they're not all the same, and usually they change over time. They like morph over time. What we maybe see at the beginning is not what we always see at the end, but regardless, there is a structure to organize the people and how they interact. Government systems are important in looking at civilizations because they help us to see how the people organized resources, food, water, materials, right? How were they divvied out? Who got what? How was it handled? Did they need to go somewhere else and bring it in? How was that organized? Government systems help with that. Government systems are also important for defending people, property, land. And so early civilizations, we see that there are some really powerful rulers who do a lot for the defense of their people and also for the growth of their civilizations, right? Land, more resources. Again, comes from some organized government. We also see established rules or law codes. Over time, again, they might change. Over time, different systems, again, might be in place, but we see a structured cause and effect, crime, punishment, system of rules that people are expected to follow as members of the society. So that is an important feature of a government system. And all of these things come together to try to maintain order. So that's, again, if you have large numbers of people living in cities, they're interacting, they're trading, they're working, whoever is in charge, the person or the entity wants to maintain order, and puts things in place in order to do that. Number 3 for civilizations is aspects of a religion. Again, sometimes it changes over time. Certainly the early civilizations have different aspects to their religious cultures, but we see a religious system in all of these early civilizations, a shared collective belief amongst the people. So not only a belief about the spiritual aspects of a god or gods within their society, but rituals, traditions, customs, maybe religious dress, religious officials. There are things in place, again, as a whole, as a culture, as a society, that acknowledge their spiritual beliefs. And again, looking at that from a historical perspective, we can learn a lot about what those people felt to be really important, what they valued, by looking at these things and the way that they're organized in their early societies. One of the things about religion, just as a side note, especially in early civilizations, we do see a similarity in that all of the early civilizations believe in some form of a divine kingship, meaning that they make a connection between their leader and their religion, whether their leader is appointed by God or is a god or somehow has access to a god or gods in some way, and they make that connection. We see that in all of the early civilizations. Number 4, features of a civilization is a social structure. And this is something that develops over time. So again, we have established cities, systems, traditions, and policies that allow for a social structure to develop and then grow. And when we say social structure, what we mean is different social classes. So, if you have a nomadic tribe or just a very small group that is living together, there may be a leader, but everybody else is relatively equal. In early civilizations, or in what we consider a civilization, we see some sort of social hierarchy. There is a person or a group at the top, right? The very wealthy, the very powerful. There may be, the leader may be in that group, or the leader may be in some sort of aristocratic group that, again, has power. Oftentimes the religious leaders are also at the top. You have a large center group that is basically most of the population, the craftsmen, the farmers, the people who are working. And then you have they're working, but they have access to the features of the society, right? The rules, they may have some freedoms that are allowed to them, or responsibilities because of their role as essentially a citizen of a civilization. And then the third group, the lowest class, would be in these early civilizations, the slaves, those who again did not have rights, but certainly were used for the development of the system. The social classes have a lot to do with the economic structure also. So when we talk about things like trade, which is really, really important, and a whole different topic, a whole additional topic in itself, these social structures are really important to look at when we talk about who is getting the material, who is responsible for accessing the resources, who reaps the benefit of the resources, where do they go, and how does that divvy up amongst society. So the social structure is something that builds, and again, helps us later on to get an insight into a lot of the systems of a civilization. Okay, number 5 for civilizations is writing. And writing is important to us as historians because that gives us records, it gives us information. In fact, historians look at when writing starts to be like the beginning of history. Anything before that is prehistory, it's prehistoric, because even though we might have information, we don't have that written evidence like we have when we start to see the settlement of civilizations. All of the 4 major early river civilizations have some form of writing that they use for record keeping. Again, all of these pieces go together. So the record keeping is important for the government. It's important for the trade and the economy. It's also important for things like weather, keeping track of weather and farming, and therefore feeding the people, protecting them from if the Nile is going to flood, keeping track of that so that they know how to interact with not only each other, but within their geography around them. And so governments keep records for a lot of different reasons: taxes, laws, again, farming, time, a lot of different reasons that governments start to write things down. And those people that are involved in the writing of the things in ancient civilizations actually become very revered for their role. And as more people over time gain these skills, we start to see other things. We learn other things from their writing because we start to see people writing down stories, writing down their feelings, writing down about the world they view around them, and we get literature and we get other historical accounts. And so that's really important for us to use as we look at history as well. Which leads right into the last aspect, number 6, which is art. When you have a civilization and a society that has an organized way for people to produce food, have access to water, have, again, an organized system, then you have people that start to develop additional skills because they're not necessarily dependent every day on finding their own food. There are systems in place that can help them to have access to food without having to go out to the farms themselves. And so people begin to develop skills. Also, as we have those higher classes in the social classes, the leaders, the aristocracy, the religious officials, building and requesting different types of art, whether it's a religious aspect or it's a temple, some sort of architecture, it's a sculpture, or it's a carving of some sort. We see in these civilizations art springing up, again, as a reflection of what is important in those societies. And within a society, we see that there are common aspects. So all along, right, all of these things, common religious beliefs, common organization, again, within a civilization. Same thing with art, based on the materials they have access to, the type of messages they're trying to produce with their art, the styles in which the art is produced. We can often piece with a certain civilization because of their features. So if you think of Egypt, ancient Egypt, and that early civilization, there probably are some pieces of art that come to mind that all have very similar aspects, again, whether it's pyramids or large sculpture or hieroglyphics that reflect the important things in that society, that are produced by the members of that culture, by that society, and that are reflective of them. So when we use it today, again, different meaning than what the European imperialists use the word civilization to mean, and what we use it to mean when we talk about history. There are exceptions. I said the Aztecs, for example, are considered a civilization, but they did not have as advanced of a writing. They didn't have a written language, but they still had a form of keeping their own records. And so these 6 rules are not, 100% all the time, but they're really good guidelines for us to use when determining whether or not a group in history qualifies as a civilization. So keep that in mind when we are moving through history. Thanks for watching.